Okay, so more fun with astrology. And I thought this time I'd focus, not that I like these guys or enjoy thinking about them, and I've only read about and written about one of them, Charles Whitman, the Texas Tower Killer. Um, all I know about these other guys is that they're serial killers, and also the Columbine kids. I wrote a chapter about them in Age of Catastrophe. But I was reading today in Reinhold Ebertein's excellent book, Combinations of Stellar Influences, and I began to realize that there are certain aspects to watch for in the charts of very hostile, physically aggressive individuals. And so I was looking at it and I thought, so there's, you got to watch for Saturn Pluto, which everyone knows is the worst. It's like the worst two planets you can get together. We're still coming out of a mundane Saturn Pluto aspect that coded for COVID. Saturn Moon, Saturn Venus, Pluto Mars, and then also Mars Neptune, surprisingly a bit. We'll see in a moment. Now, with regard to Pluto Mars and Saturn Pluto, I think have to do with the sphere of action. They are extremely aggressive. Ebertin says that Saturn Pluto codes for cruelty. Everyone knows Saturn Pluto, every astrologer knows that it's the worst two planets you can get together. It codes for cruelty, forced labor, concentration camps, and wars. And then Pluto Mars is extraordinarily aggressive energy. Mars is the body, and Pluto is power, so it can code as the desire to harm someone else's body. So those two are physical. Now, if we look at Saturn Moon and Saturn Venus, these are emotional. The Moon has to do with emotions. So Saturn Moon types tend to be very narcissistic, selfish types. They tend to be individuals who are isolates, who tend to be loners, and who tend to have trouble relating to other people. Same thing in a certain sense with Saturn and Venus, except that Venus has more to do with aesthetics, with sex and art, and things which are pleasing to the senses. Saturn Venus, you would normally, let's say, you would find in the chart of a frigid woman. Let's say you would find Saturn makes Venus very cold and unresponsive and indifferent to aesthetically pleasing things. So those two have to do with the emotions, and the other two have to do with actions. And then Ebertin, I think, adds one more, Mars Neptune, surprisingly, because Neptune is associated with spirituality on the one hand, but if it doesn't go through spirituality, it can cause paranoia on the other hand, and addiction. And if you get Mars in there, on the one hand, you could get an Olympic athlete who's a swimmer, let's say, a Mars Neptune type, or you can get a Mars Neptune type who's athletic in the sense of dealing with the transpersonal energies. But you could also get people who intend harm toward others. Because of the paranoia, because of the reality disorientation. And I think when we're going to look at 5 or 6 charts here of serial killers and spree killers, and I think we'll see some interesting things. I think that it's not the case that if you have these aspects on your natal chart that you're a bad guy, but if you get a bunch of these, and I think that's the thing we're going to see here, is that they all have a bunch of them, these aggressive aspects, and I think these are the most aggressive and the most emotionally rigidifying and calcifying. Let's take a look at Ted Bundy. I don't know a damn thing about Ted Bundy. Don't want to know a damn thing, except that he killed a bunch of people and everybody thought he was charming. The women did, anyway. And then so take a look over here. We have Saturn and Pluto right here, very tight conjunction. They're right on top of each other. 8 degrees here, 13 degrees here. So already we have the cruelty archetype. And it's right on his ascendant, which has to do with the personality and the way that the personality manifests in the outer world. And then down here, look at this. We have all this charm. Look at all this suave charm, this stellium here, Moon, Mars, Sun, Mercury, Venus. They're exactly the same planets I have in a stellium in Cancer, with the addition of Jupiter here. Yeah, so this was a suave guy. This, absolutely. Now notice though that so the Mars is trining the Pluto the Pluto Saturn there. So the blue lines in the middle there indicate a trine. So there's Mars in there. And also with Uranus, we have Uranus. The positive side of Uranus is breakthrough, rebellion, but the negative side is destabilizations, sudden accidents, sudden things. Suddenness is the key archetype of Uranus, but destabilization. And Uranus pretty much destabilizes all this charm. And notice that the charm takes place below the ascendant-descendant threshold, which is in the personal realm, whereas above the ascendant-descendant threshold, this is all the public realm. He doesn't have much going on at the midheaven, the public realm here, but he definitely has these cruel energies. And let's see, anything else here? Mars opposite, Mars opposite Uranus. That's right. It's the body, and then the paranoia. Let's see, Neptune is quincunx his midheaven, which could cause paranoia, very much so. And it also is sextiling those blue lines there. It's sextiling the Pluto Saturn, and then also over here it's sextiling in this direction the Moon, and the Moon is afflicted by Saturn. Note that. Here's the Moon, and it's afflicted by Saturn. That makes for emotional coldness and isolation, and people who just don't get along well with others. They just don't. So that's Bundy, kind of a superficial reading, but it does strike me the cluster of the very difficult aspects that Ebert was talking about in his book is characteristic of Bundy. And then let's take a look at John Wayne Gacy, once again, about whom I know nothing and wish to know nothing, except that he was a serial killer. But let's look for those aggressive energies here. What do we see? So we've got Pluto right here. And Pluto, so Pluto is in opposition to his Venus, which codes for unusual sexual proclivities. I don't know what his sex life was like, and I don't want to know. And here's Mars over here. Where is Saturn? Okay, Saturn, yeah. Saturn is directly opposed to his ascendant. That's fine, that's not a big deal. But here we do have Saturn and Mars within the same neighborhood. Saturn and Mars. Now, Saturn and Mars, that could be good for an architect, let's say. Mars is the body and Saturn is structure, physical things, building physical things. So it could be constructive, except that it's got Uranus right in between them, and Uranus has destabilized them to make them very destructive, destructive of the human body. And then over here, his Moon, let's see, his Moon is directly, he's got Moon conjunct Sun, which would normally be good. That's a good balance of masculine, feminine energies, the will and the emotions. But we've got Neptune coming in through there. And again, that could be good for somebody interested in spirituality. But if that spirituality doesn't come through, then you got paranoia. Paranoia. And then Pluto over here, let's see, Pluto. Let's see, what did I see earlier here when I was looking at this? Pluto coming in, trining. So Pluto's very dark, heavy energy, trining his Sun conjunct Moon. And then, okay, anything else creepy about him? Okay. Yeah, okay, there we go. Mars sextile Pluto. There we go. That's what Ebert calls the very, very aggressive, physically violent energy there coming through. Now, all these aspects have positive potentialities and capabilities. So I suppose the positive aspect of Pluto and Mars might be somebody like who's really good at, I don't know, channeling power through the body somehow. Maybe it's good for athletes. I don't know. But it is aggressive, and Ebert says that it's extremely aggressive energy. Okay, let's take a look at who else do we have here. Oh, Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. I know a little bit more about him from watching one of those Netflix things on him. So he was married. He's a very rare example of a serial killer who was married for a long period of time and then had a hobby of killing people. And then he stopped for a while. It might have been for like 10 years. He had this facade of a church-going guy. Nobody would have suspected him in a million years to be a serial killer. Then he popped back up again, started killing again, and then some guy caught him who figured out his computer was the church computer that he was using or something like that. All right, so here we have Saturn and Pluto. They're a bit far apart at first glance, except that it actually turns out to be a semi-sextile. A sextile is a 60-degree angle. A semi-sextile is a 30-degree angle. That's pretty much what we've got here. Most astrologers don't use semi-sextiles, but I think it applies here in this case. It's 3 degrees and 8 degrees, so there's a 5-degree difference, but it's close enough to 30 degrees in his case, I think, to apply. And then look at this monster over here. Direct opposition Mars-Pluto. Just a straight up opposition between Mars and Pluto. Or I'm sorry, Mars and Pluto. That's that aggressive energy, that energy of wanting to cause harm to the body. And then here we have Neptune in opposition to the midheaven, could cause social paranoia, and in opposition to Mercury conjunct the Sun. This is the right guy. That's why there's a reason why why these guys are so hard to catch. They're usually pretty sharp. And then let's see, his Venus is afflicted by. Let's see, Venus Mars is fine. Let's see, over here we've got Venus and the ascendant. I don't see any problem there. And even Venus quincunx Jupiter is good. Those would all theoretically be good in someone else, but those aggressive energies are really there. They're extremely aggressive. And what about Uranus here? Uranus. Oh yes, so Uranus is sextiling the Sun Mercury, which makes it unstable. Bright, but there's some instability there. And then over here, Uranus coming down through Neptune can destabilize the spiritual forces in an individual. All right, let's see what we got here. 1, 2, 3. Let's see. Now where are we at? Okay, so I think we skipped over Charles Whitman. Yeah, I had him. Charles Whitman was the first spree killer. I forget the date, 1962 maybe? I forget. Even though I wrote a chapter. I write these chapters and then I just completely forget the information. But he's the guy who was the first spree killer. He was a military man. He was in the Marines. He got a dishonorable discharge, I believe. And he was a total fuck up. He was married, and he tried to make a go of it. And then eventually, one night, he just got so fed up with his wife, murdered her, then murdered her mother, and then ascended the tower, the Texas Tower, and started shooting people randomly. I forget how many people he killed. It was a bunch. So let's take a look here. It's not a surprise that Mars is his highest planet. Mars, with its aggressive energy, is his highest planet. And it's approaching the midheaven. You know, it's kind of like ascending that tower with the violence. It's on the way. And then over here, so we have Saturn. Yeah, Saturn sextiling Mars. Saturn and Mars. That's the builder archetype again, but in this case it's negatively afflicted because Uranus is right nearby, just like we saw with the other guy. Uranus destabilizes that what could potentially be constructive energy, but Uranus destabilizes it in his case, and it just fucking fucks it up. And then the Moon, let's see, Moon and Mars. Moon square Mars makes for a very moody, angry individual. And then over here we have, Pluto and Mars. Once again, there's that serial killer sort of archetype. Mars, with the intent to harm people's bodies, going there as a trine. And then with Venus, we've got, let's see. Don't see any problems there with Venus, but with the Moon. Okay. and then there's Neptune opposed by Mars. And this is why I mentioned that Ebertine said, when I looked up Mars-Neptune, he was like, the negative side of Mars-Neptune is because of the paranoia possibilities. And now what's interesting, if you think of Neptune, like the perfect author for Neptune is Philip K. Dick, because it's both. With Philip K. Dick, you get all the paranoia about what's real and what isn't, but you also get all these archetypes and these spiritual energies going through him. It was like the perfect mix of the Neptunian archetype. But if the paranoid energies take over, this can be an intent to harm other people. This is what Ebertine says in his book. So now let's take a look at, so that's the first of the spree killers. Let's take a look at the kids who did Columbine. This is Eric Harris, who is more or less the sort of philosophical architect, let's say. He's the one who glommed on to Nazi ideology. Let's see. So I just go straight for Saturn, and there's Pluto. Right in the neighborhood. Hey, look at these two guys. Saturn and Pluto. Right next to each other. Jupiter would be a good check on Saturn. Jupiter is beneficent, full of optimism. Saturn is pessimistic and negative. Saturn constricts, Jupiter expands. But then Pluto is in the neighborhood. And it's opposing this entire stellium over here of Venus, Sun, and Mars. And note there that we've got Mars directly opposite Pluto. That red midline there in the center. That's, once again, it seems almost to be like a serial killer trademark. That Pluto Mars. That's the one you find turning up the most with these guys. And what's going on with his moon? Looks like moon is squaring Saturn. Yeah. Moon square Saturn. Once again, Saturn tends to isolate individuals. Anybody, if it touches the moon, it's not a good combination. Saturn and the moon, it's not. And in a relationship, by the way, as I've learned from experience, if you do a synastry chart, which is a chart of, you take a couple and you synthesize the charts, and if they have Saturn and moon in aspect, it's pretty much the mark of Cain when it comes to relationships. It ain't gonna work. Sorry, but it's not. So here we have Neptune opposing the moon. Again, the paranoid factor coming in, though in this case through the emotions, not the intellect. And he's got Uranus right on his ascendant, which can destabilize his relations with others. Okay, so that's that kid. Very tragic, because I see in this chart a lot of what could have been workable possibilities, especially like with the Jupiter near the midheaven, which is great for a career, but it just didn't happen. He went the other way, and that's too bad. And his companion here, Dylan Klebold, Mars also is the highest planet. We saw the other guy with Whitman, with Mars as the highest planet. Very aggressive energies at the midheaven. And let's see what we got over here with this peacock's fantail here. Sun, okay, Saturn, and so Saturn is 9 degrees Libra, and Pluto's quite far away, 22 degrees, but they're both in the same sign. They're both in Libra. So if planets, I'm giving that a wide orb. Most astrologers would say you can't do that. But if planets are in the same sign, I consider them to be pretty much together. They're in the neighborhood. So I tend to use wide orbs, wider orbs than most astrologers do. So Saturn restricting his intellect in a very narrow way of thinking. Jupiter should have expanded it, but it's like his intellect is right in between Saturn and Jupiter. And they're right on the ascendant, dealing with the self in relation to others. And let's see, Pluto is squaring the midheaven. and it's trining the moon. And the moon, look at all that, all those trines. With the moon here, just a whole bunch of trines to this whole stellium, which would be fine, except in his case, not fine. Here's Neptune also with a bunch of trines and sextiles to this whole stellium. And of course, Neptune brings paranoia if it's not properly channeled into spirituality. So that's what I see in these guys. Is Venus is what? I don't see any aspect to Saturn there, but yeah. And most of these guys note that their planets are mostly down in the personal realm here, down below. Klebold has a few up above, but most of them are in the personal realm. Now, let's take a look at the chart of Adolf Hitler, just for fun. Let's throw that in. Now, notice that he has a peacock's fantail in the public world, unlike most of these guys. And let's take a look back. Bam, with Ted Bundy, whole bunch in the personal, private world. Gacy's is spread out a bit, but again, a bunch in the private world. Dennis Rader. Dennis Rader's kind of all over the place. The BTK guy. He was prominent in his community, well-known, church-going guy. Charles Whitman, everything except for Mars is below the threshold. And these guys are like just sitting on simmering archetypes that are just really making them miserable. Okay, so, but with Hitler, note that we have here, most of the planets are in the public. This is because this is a collective figure. Now, Hitler differs a little bit, quite a bit actually, from these other mass murderers in the sense that you have to consider that this is not a guy who killed people with his own hands. He gave orders to have people exterminated. So the energies are a little different. Pluto and Saturn are quite a bit apart, although they, no, I take that back. They're sextile, actually. Look at that. Did I get that right? Yeah. Pluto, so he has Pluto sextile Saturn. Okay, no, not a surprise for a guy who would inaugurate a wave of concentration camps. Saturn at the midheaven, by the way, the midheaven has to do with career. This is a very lonely archetype to have. Saturn on your midheaven. Saturn has a tendency toward isolation. So very lonely individual. And look at this over here with Pluto conjunct Neptune. That's the interest in the occult. This explains Hitler's interest in weird occult things. That's what that archetype is. And then what do we have over here? He's got Venus conjunct Mars, which you would think would be really good. Let's see. But it's in aspect to Uranus here, the green line, which, let's see, destabilizes it. It's not a stable, harmonious balance, let's say, of male-female energies. It's unstable. Hitler, by the way, was born with one testicle. Interesting, considering that I believe he has Saturn squaring Venus. So there's that coldness archetype again. There's that archetype of emotional coldness, which could be a frigid person. Whereas a person, let's say, as we saw before with one of these guys, I think it was Wayne Gacy, Pluto and Venus like supercharges the sexual energies. It does the exact opposite. And here we have working, so in the one-on-one world, very bright. Once again, we have Mercury conjunct Sun, very bright individual here, and it's opposed by Uranus, the rebel archetype, because this is a guy. And it also, recall that with Sri Aurobindo, he had Uranus conjunct Mars, which is the archetype of the political revolutionary. This is the guy, and Uranus is the rebel. This is the guy who came up out of the underworld of the trenches of World War I, where he was nearly gassed to death, and decided to take on all of Europe. So he became sort of like Satan in Milton's Paradise Lost. That's the sort of character here. And it's right on his ascendant, so it characterizes his personality to a T. And then down here you get Jupiter conjunct Moon, which is good. As I looked up in Ebertine, and he was saying it's good for like political leaders who create social happiness in their society. This can code for a widespread social happiness, and indeed, when the Nazis took power, the Germans were thrilled because they solved the debacle of the Weimar disaster and put everyone to work, and everyone was quite happy. That's the Jupiter Moon archetype here. So I don't see, he does have Saturn and Pluto, the cruelty aspect, but I don't see, like with the spree killers rather, Pluto in aspect with Mars. They're too far away here. They're not in aspect, and that really is the serial killer, mass murderer's signature. I think now that I'm looking over this, more than anything is that Pluto-Mars cruelty. Now, just for a contrast, for the fun of it, just to show you, let's take a look at my chart. And I don't have any of that. Fortunately, I don't have any of that shit. I've got Saturn sextile Mercury, and it's squaring Pluto conjunct Uranus, which then in turn is sextiling Neptune, which is my spiritual interests, and it's all organized and aimed at Mercury. Surprise, surprise, imagine that. And then over here I have this cozy, warm stellium of Venus, Sun, Moon, Mars, all very compatible planets, all very warm and cozy. A decent guy, in other words. I don't have any of those aspects. I don't have Saturn Moon. I don't have Saturn Venus. I don't have Pluto Mars. I don't even have Mars Neptune. None of them. So just to throw out as a counterexample to what we've been looking at, and it doesn't mean that if in your chart you have, let's say, Pluto Mars or Saturn Pluto, doesn't mean that you're a bad guy or anything like that. But I would say this. If you get a bunch of them in there, I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. A whole bunch of them does not indicate a harmonious individual. I would love to know the past lives of these guys. Not that I give a shit about them, but I would love to know the past lives about them. Ted Bundy's past life, for instance, would just be interesting to know, to see how it differs from this one. So maybe I'll contact a medium at some point and dig into a couple of these past lives just for fun, as a thought experiment. All right, there we go. More fun with astrology.